that. And that's what we're going to talk about next week. Of course, I have another word of judgment. It's the judgment of the Lord that's being released in the earth in the days ahead, right? Not many days hence, because we already know, I've said it time and time again, that we're coming into the time of the fulfillment of God's judgment. We're already in the season of God's judgment. We're already there, but now it's time for us to begin to experience the fulfillment of that. Every prophetic word that the Lord spoke through his servants, the prophets, and through whomever he chose to use, other prophetic people, then we're about to see those words come to pass. Remember, he said that there will be no more delay. So he says when he begins to move, we're about to see God bring it all to pass, right? Many are going to be shocked. It's going to be, once again, shock and awe, right? It's going to be the best of times and the worst of times at the same time. And the word that I'm bringing, that was one of the confirmations. It's literally, this word that I have for this week coming up is literally confirmation, right? It's lining up with the other words that God has already spoken, but it's it's almost like a final thing before the final thing, right? It's almost like it's so clear in this thing, in this word, that you almost can't doubt God, right? Because he begins to make it clear for us. And so I'm excited about that, not because of the judgment. I'm excited about the restoration, but I'm also excited just to learn about this word because it's stuff that I never knew. And so I feel like I'm gaining so much wisdom, so much knowledge in the things of God. And whenever, we know that knowledge is power, right? We know that wisdom sets us up to be used by God in mighty ways, right? In great ways. And so it sets us up for success. It sets us up to prosper whenever we take on wisdom, whenever we embrace wisdom, right? Because we know that wisdom is the principal thing. That's what the Bible teaches us, right? But it says, in all thy getting, right? Get an understanding. And so, that's where God has had us in this season. He's been dealing with our hearts about understanding. We talked about Daniel setting his heart to understand. We talked about Micah, right? When God laid out his complaint, it was about us understanding what it was that God required of us. What was his complaint against us? And then what did he require of us, right? How do we make it right? What do we need to do to get in right standing with God? Right? Where are we missing it? What's the disconnect? Where are we getting it wrong? And so that's what God has been showing us. He's been laying that thing out, and it's been an amazing thing to watch. And so now we were in the wisdom of Solomon. God was telling us about the heart, the surrendered heart that Solomon had, and how he had a genuine desire, right, to understand and to have knowledge, to be able to discern between good and evil, right and wrong, because he knew that if he was going to be a leader of such a great people, he knew he couldn't do it by himself. He knew that the task, the assignment was too great for him in his own strength and his own wisdom. So he sought out the wisdom of God. And when God laid out this amazing offer for Solomon, he had the wisdom. I mean, the dude was wise already because he had a humble heart, and he asked God to give him a discerning heart, a wise heart, right? So that he could discern between good and evil, between good and bad, between right and wrong, how to make the right move, how to make wise decisions, right? Because people's lives were on the line, because he would be responsible for so great a mass of people, right? And he wanted to make sure that he wasn't leading them astray. This was a pressure. You're talking about pressure. This was a lot of pressure, right, on Solomon. And he had the right heart. He had the right spirit. And God granted him his request. And not only that, remember, God made him not just wise. He gave him what he asked for, but he made him the wisest man of his time. And then he blessed him with stuff that he didn't even ask for. He gave him riches, and he made him honorable before men. And so that's what God does when our heart is in the right posture, when we have a right heart towards God, when our heart is pure, when we don't have ulterior motives, right? When we have pure motives before God, that's when we begin to see God bless us in amazing ways. And so, I just have so much respect, so much love, appreciation for God, because look at how he's training us before he moves us into the blessing. So when he moves us in there, here. There's no reason, y'all, for us to get it wrong. And I have to be careful about what I say, because it's so easy, though, once we get comfortable and once things begin to go well for us, just like the children of Israel, right? They had a tendency to fall back into sin. So I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm so perfect and it's so easy. No, it is not easy. So I'm not even going to say that. But this is the truth right here. If we stay with God, if we keep our hearts and minds on God, if we continue to walk in the ways of God and continue to study our word and continue to keep up our quiet time with God, then there is no reason for us to get it wrong. If we do what we're supposed to do, then there's no reason that we should miss it. There's no reason that we should get off track, right? But if we begin to fall back, if we begin to slack up on our quiet time, that's when the enemy comes in. That's when we begin to see and experience those temptations, right? I mean, we're going to experience the temptations, but that's when it begins to gain ground. That's when it begins to, because it's subtle. Remember that the enemy is subtle, right? The little moves of the enemy, it's subtle at first, but it's doing a lot of damage beneath the surface, and we don't see it until it's too late. So we've got to make sure that we maintain relationship with God. It can be kind of scary a little bit, because God is going to bless his people so greatly, and you don't want to mess up, right? I don't want to mess up. It's just like when God delivered the children of Israel out of Egypt, and then, how can they turn around and go and raise up an idol, right? A golden statue. And God just delivered them and they turned on God that quick. It didn't even take long. Can you imagine why God is so upset? I can. It makes perfect sense. I would be upset too. I just did this amazing thing for you, and you're going to turn your back on me and go and begin to serve and praise and worship an idol, a statue, something that ain't even alive, a lesser God, basically, right? That's why God was angry about many of these people who have turned on him that we see in the Bible. And that's why God is mad today and bringing judgment on some of his highly esteemed servants, right? Some of those people who have turned their backs on God, because they turn their backs on God to serve a lesser God. They're serving idols. They're worshiping men. They're worshiping money. They're worshiping material trappings. They're after all that stuff, after all that God did for them, the very one who made it possible for them to rise to the great heights that they did and that they have. And then they're going to turn around and give the glory to somebody else, give the praise to somebody else, begin to seek somebody else for counsel. We should be ashamed. All of us that have done that, all of us, even unknowingly, so many people, because we just admire people, because we see people who have really touched our lives in a profound way. But if we're not careful, it turns to worship. We make them an idol in our lives, and we don't even realize it until God has to show up and show us, right, that we've taken our eyes off God, and now we're beginning to worship man. We've put man in a place where God goes. We've put an idol in a place where God belongs. That's God's space, right, in our heart. We've given that to somebody besides God, and we are dead wrong for it. We're dead wrong. And so these are the things that God is teaching us. This is what we're learning before we go into the promise, before we receive it, before we go in and take over the land, right? Everything God promised us, right? This good land, the land of milk and honey, that's what we're about to walk into, right? The Ephesians 3:20. It's going to be amazing. Not all at once, right? Because we learn in the Bible that he didn't move them out all at once. This was a process. It was a gradual proceeding, right? We began to see God move them out, our enemies, little by little, as we begin to take over more and more of the land. So that's what we're going to see, because he knows what we can handle. He doesn't want us to be overwhelmed, but he wants us to begin to use everything that he's taught us, right? He's got to know that we can handle what it is that he's giving us. And so that's why in a lot of ways we've seen that God has lowered the hedge, right? He hasn't completely removed it, but he's lowered it. And so that's why many of us have experienced some unexpected warfare, some things that, because I know me specifically, I'm like, now how is this when I'm supposed to have a hedge? But you have to remember that God lowered the hedge. He lowered the hedge because you've got to be able to operate in warfare. You've got to be able to contend with the enemy in spiritual warfare. You've got to know how to use your weapon, right? You've got to know how to use your weapons. You've got to know how to use the weapon of prayer. We've got to know how to use the weapon of the word. We've got to know how to use the weapon of praise and worship. We've got to know how to put fasting, incorporate fasting with it. And we have to know how to incorporate even our giving, right? Sacrifice and fasting and in giving. All of that, prayer, praise and worship, fasting and in giving, and reading the word of God. All of it works together, and all of it combined is powerful. It's like, how can you get it wrong, right? How can you be defeated when you employ all of that, all of the weapons that God has given you? It shouldn't be any problem for us to begin to pull down, dismantle, and destroy all the works of the enemy, not by might nor by power, but by his spirit, says the Lord God. So that's where we are today. That's the word of the Lord. And I just wanted to touch base and let you know that we're moving into an exciting season. We're about to see God do some great and mighty things. He's going to move through some of his people, right? In miracles, signs, and wonders. And he's about to show up in all his splendor and take care of our enemies, right? Many of the enemies of God are going to meet destruction in this very next season. Is going to be an awesome thing to behold, just because we've never seen God move in all his wrath in our generation to this point. And so it's going to be a matter of shock and awe, right? The best of times and the worst of times. It's just like when the children of Israel were crossing the Red Sea and the Pharaoh and all of his great army were dead on their tracks, right? When God split the Red Sea, it was the best of times for the Israelites, right? The children of Israel. But when he caused that water to come back together, it was the worst of times for Pharaoh and the great army, right? The best of times and the worst of times at the same time. So get ready, get ready, get ready. God is about to move in the earth, and we're about to witness something we've never, ever seen before in our times. And so I pray that you all have a blessed and exciting 4th of July weekend, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again real soon.